very good afternoon, and I welcome you all to the topic Chemotherapy General Considerations Part 2. In the previous class, we had covered Chemotherapy General Considerations Part 1. In previous class, we had covered classifications, the side effects, and some definitions. So in this class, we will be covering the process of selection of AMA, the combined use of antimicrobial agents, the prophylactic use of antimicrobial agents, and failure of antimicrobial therapy. So as usual, whenever we are selecting any drug, in general, we follow these steps in general, like first of all, make a proper diagnosis. Then remove the barriers. Here there are many barriers which have to be removed, like draining of the pus, removing of the foreign body, surgical interventions have to be done. Okay. Then decide if at all use of antimicrobial agent is necessary. If it is necessary, then select the best drug. We studied on the rational use of drugs, like how to select a drug. Then administer the drug, continue the therapy, and monitor for clinical improvement as well as for development of side effects. Okay. Now coming to the choice of an antimicrobial agent. This is very important. We choose the antimicrobial agents based on three broad factors. One is patient or host factors, second one is the organism related factors, and third is the agent or drug related factors. Now let's see factors related to the host. Now age. In general pharmacology and pharmacokinetics, we have seen that the pharmacokinetics differs according to the age. Like in newborns, there is one drug called chloramphenicol. It can produce grey baby syndrome because neonates cannot conjugate and eliminate chloramphenicol, whereas this does not happen in older children or adults. Sulfonamides. We have seen that sulfonamides, they displace bilirubin. Now this displaced bilirubin can cross the blood-brain barrier in neonates, in whom the blood-brain barrier is not fully formed. This kernicterus is specific for neonates, and again it is not observed in elderly or adult, even older children. In previous class, we had seen that aminoglycosides, they produce ototoxicity and nephrotoxicity. Again, in the elderly, their pharmacokinetics or their elimination is low, and they stay in the body for a longer period of time. So, aminoglycosides, they cause higher degree of ototoxicity in elderly. Now, tetracyclines, they are deposited in teeth and bone. So, specifically, they are to be avoided in children, especially growing children, because that time their bone is in the growing period, and once the teeth are discolored, they will remain discolored forever. So we have seen that the certain drugs are to be avoided in certain ages. Similarly, certain drugs are indicated also. Now coming to host defense. Actually, in our body, this the elimination of infection, that is done by two processes. First and most important is our body host defense. It will fight the infection, and ideally we are helping that system with some drugs. So in the fight against antimicrobials, our host defense and drugs both are working together. So obviously, in certain conditions, the host defense may be impaired, then the role of drugs becomes more important. Let's see. Some low-grade pathogens or intracellular pathogens, normally they will not be producing infection. But if the host defense is impaired, like in case of acquired immune deficiency syndrome, then they get a chance to produce infection. Then we have pyogenic infections which are more common in case of neutropenia. If any reason the bone marrow is suppressed or the patient is taking some other chemotherapy, radiation therapy, if neutropenia is there, then the pyogenic infections, they will occur more frequently and also their severity may increase. Then the host defense may also be impaired because of certain immunosuppressive drugs like corticosteroids or other antimicrobial agents, radiation, and so on. So there is one condition called subacute bacterial endocarditis. Here there are vegetations in the cardiac valve and the microorganisms get a chance to hide behind that barrier. Okay, not only host defense, but certain conditions the microbes are more protected, like inside a barrier in case of subacute bacterial endocarditis. So when the host defense and drugs both are fighting together, that is one scene. If the host defense is lower, then the role of drugs becomes more increasing. In these conditions, we will go for intensive therapy and that too with the cidal drugs. In normal persons with good host defense, even bacteriostatic drug will be acting good and the infection will be cured. Whereas in case of impaired host defenses, we will always try to use intensive therapy and that too with the cidal drugs. Okay. Now elimination and metabolism. Yes. Most of the drugs in our body, they are eliminated either renally or via hepatic route. So in case the elimination is impaired, as in cases of renal pathology, renal disease or liver disease, accordingly we have to either stop the drug, change it or reduce it, because if there is impaired clearance, the plasma concentration will increase and it can produce toxicity. For example, we can see that if the renal function is impaired, there are certain drugs which are to be avoided, like nitrofurantoin. There are certain drugs which can be administered at a reduced dose, and the dose has to be reduced even in mild cases of renal failure, like aminoglycosides. There are certain drugs which are comparatively safer, not absolutely safe, but comparatively safer, and their dose has to be reduced only in case of moderate to severe renal failure. An example is cotrimoxazole. Similarly, in case of hepatic failure, there are certain drugs which should be totally avoided, like tetracyclines or erythromycin estuolate. Whereas there are certain drugs like chloramphenicol, the dose can be reduced and it can be given if that is needed. Now another host factor is the local factor. In local factor, suppose there is presence of pus. So if there is presence of pus, many times the drugs are not able to penetrate that deep. There is less oxygen, so there are other processes also going on. And certain drugs like sulfonamides and aminoglycosides, they are not useful. So first of all, we have to drain the pus. If it is possible, drain it or remove it by any source. Then the bacterial load becomes very less. Now since the bacterial load is less, the drugs also can have a better penetration. There is better oxygen level and blood flow. Neutrophils or WBCs also can reach there. That itself will improve or that will hasten the cure of infection. So whenever there is pus, if possible, drain it first. That will give a quicker cure. Now if there is some necrotic material or foreign body like catheter or stone or even some other prosthesis, then what happens is that the bacteria or microbes, they are able to generate a biofilm and they stay close to the prosthesis or foreign body or that instruments like catheter. They create a biofilm around them and the drug is not able to reach or penetrate that deep. So inside the biofilm, the microorganisms are staying safe from the antimicrobials and they are slowly released from that. So we have to make sure that these things are not happening. Then coming to hematomas. Okay, hematomas, they can harbor antimicrobials. They can harbor the organisms. The organisms can enter a hematoma or they can be present when the clot is formed. Once the clot is formed, then it becomes difficult for the drug to penetrate it. And after like 3 to 4 hours, the penetration of drug inside the clot becomes almost impossible. Whereas it is a source of microorganisms which are still inside it and they are multiplying. Also, there are certain drugs like penicillins, cephalosporins or tetracyclines. They get bound to the degraded hemoglobin and its products. And this is of importance in case of surgical infections, which we will see later on. Again, if there is anaerobic environment, then it's a problem. Certain microorganisms concentrate the drugs like aminoglycosides via oxygen-dependent pathway. So, in case of anaerobic environment, that concentration of aminoglycosides is not built up in the microorganisms and they will not be that much effective. Similarly, as I told, there is a penetration barrier if a biofilm is formed. If the pH is lowered, again certain drugs will not be acting as they normally do, like macrolides and aminoglycosides. Now in host factors, we have also to inquire about the previous drug exposures. Now previous drug exposure is important in 2 aspects. Like number 1, in case of many diseases like tuberculosis or even HIV, if a person is exposed to those drugs, then there is a higher chance that the person will be having resistant microorganisms. So in case of tuberculosis, if there is past history of tuberculosis, then chances are that current drugs or those drugs which were used earlier, they might be not acting or they might not be effective this time. Second thing, we should always ask for the drug history is because of allergy. If a person is exposed to one drug and he is allergic to that, definitely we should not administer that drug again or similar drugs, or in general we should be more cautious while using any drug in a person who gives history of allergy. Pregnancy. Yes, certain drugs like penicillin, cephalosporin and erythromycin are considered safe in pregnancy, but many of the drugs do not have adequate data supporting the safety or safe use in pregnancy. So most of the times we have to be very cautious. Certain drugs are absolutely contraindicated in pregnancy. One example is tetracycline. Why? Because it can cause acute yellow atrophy of the liver, pancreatitis and kidney damage in the mother. Then we have already seen that tetracyclines, they are deposited in teeth and bone. So they are also avoided in pregnancy because they will affect the fetal bone and fetal teeth, those tissues. Aminoglycosides, already we have seen that it causes ototoxicity and nephrotoxicity. That ototoxicity was higher in elderly. Similarly, aminoglycosides can also cause fetal ear damage, so they are contraindicated in pregnancy. Now there are certain genetic factors like certain oxidant drugs, they will cause hemolysis in G6PD deficient patients. Example, primaquine, nitrofurantoin, sulfonamides, chloramphenicol and fluoroquinolones. So these are the drugs which cause hemolysis in G6PD deficient patients, and we should not administer these drugs without testing for glucose 6-phosphate deficiency or its levels. Okay, till now we have covered the host related factors or patient related factors. Now we will cover the organism related factors. So organism related factors, there are three conditions. One, you can give the drug or you know the organism. That clinical diagnosis itself suggests which organism is responsible. Sometimes that is not so. We have to give the drug empirically. Like somehow we can make a good guess of which organism is responsible. And thirdly, we can give drugs based on the bacteriological examination. Now, coming to the first condition, there are certain diseases where the clinical feature itself is clearly suggestive of the organism causing it, and we can give the treatment accordingly, like syphilis, chancroid, diphtheria, tetanus, plague, cholera, and many other diseases, and we will give the standard treatment for that organism. There are certain conditions like tonsillitis, otitis media, boils, vaginitis, urethritis, where exactly we do not know, but yes, most of the times they are caused by certain common group of organisms. So our treatment will be directed against those common pathogens which are commonly causing these infections. Now, there are certain infections like bronchopneumonia, empyema, meningitis, osteomyelitis, certain urinary tract infections where we cannot make a guess. And it is some conditions are severe as well. So we will not do any guesswork and we will do the bacteriological identification and sensitivity test. Then we will give the appropriate antibiotic. Now there are two conditions. One, you have a bacteriological services, diagnostic services, and second, you do not have a bacteriological services, identification services. So if there is no bacteriological diagnostic service available, then what? Then we will give broad spectrum drug or a combination of drugs to cover the common pathogens. Usually one good example is ampicillin or penicillin group of drugs to cover gram-positive, gentamicin or aminoglycosides to cover gram-negative, and either metronidazole or clindamycin to cover the anaerobes. So practically or according to probability, they will cover most of the organisms. So this is used when we do not have any bacteriological service. Now the second condition is we have bacteriological services, diagnostic services. Again, there can be two conditions. One, either we can wait for the result of bacteriological diagnosis or we cannot wait. So, when there are bacteriological services, diagnostic services available, but we cannot wait for the result. Example, in case of meningitis, septicemia, where time is precious, then again we will start with the broad spectrum antibiotics or a combination of broad spectrum antibiotics as I mentioned previously. Before that, we will take the specimen and send it for bacteriological examination or microbiological examination. Now, as soon as the result of that diagnostic test is available, then we can either modify, and if it is suitable, then we can continue with the same drugs. Okay, so this was condition where diagnostic tests are available, but we cannot wait. There are certain conditions like chronic urinary tract infection or other chronic disorders. for which diagnostic services are available and we can wait. Then in those conditions, better we will wait for the bacteriological diagnosis, culture and sensitivity test, and accordingly we will give the antimicrobial agents for the cure. Now coming to antibiotic sensitivity. Here this diagram shows a disc agar diffusion method under standardized concentrations. Okay. For that, in this we can see that there is a disc agar, certain concentrations of the drugs are kept, and there are certain halo areas around these white drugs. So they are of known concentration, and we can see that there is there is no growth in the agar plate. So we will see there is one term called breakpoint concentration. It is that concentration which demarcates between sensitive and resistant bacteria. This is more important. To know the breakpoint concentration is more important rather than simply knowing whether the bacteria is sensitive or not. Now in this diagram, through this diagram I want to explain two terms. One is minimum inhibitory concentration and another is minimum bactericidal concentrations. Here we can see that the bacteria are grown in a test tube with serial dilution of the antimicrobial agent. In this concentration we can see that there is no visible growth. So that minimum concentration which inhibits the growth of microorganism in a cultured and incubated for 24 hours well culture, that is called minimum inhibitory concentration. Now that was the first step. Now the growth is not visible, but if you take out one sample and keep it in agar or in a proper growth media, then we can see that even in those test tubes in which there was no visible growth, certain colonies are coming up. And again there is one concentration in which even no colony is grown in the agar or culture medium also. So that concentration is called minimum bactericidal concentration. Okay. So I want you to remember two terms properly. Understand the difference. One is minimum inhibitory concentration and another is minimum bactericidal concentration. So that is the minimum inhibitory concentration is the lowest concentration which prevents visible growth of the microorganism in a culture well after 24 hours of incubation with the serial dilution of antimicrobial agents. Here it is given as in this picture is given a epsilometer test. In this test we can see that there are certain strips. These strips are containing increasing concentration of antimicrobial agents and they are kept in the culture media. Then we can see that there is clear line of demarcation where we can see there is a curve which shows that above certain concentration there is growth and below certain concentration there is like no growth. So this is the minimum inhibitory concentration. Now minimum bacterial concentration is that concentration of the antimicrobial agent which kills 99.9% of the bacteria or microorganisms. In previous class we had seen that we can classify according to the activity as bactericidal or bacteriostatic. We told that a drug is bactericidal if it kills the bacteria and it is static if it inhibits the growth but does not kill. And again, one drug can be static at low concentration and cidal at high concentration. And one particular drug can be either static for one organism or it can be cidal for another organism. Okay. So, now here comes the role of minimum inhibitory concentration and minimum bactericidal concentration. If these two values are very near to each other, that is, the minimum bactericidal concentration is near to the minimum inhibitory concentration, then we will say that that agent is bactericidal, or that agent is cidal for that organism. If the difference between minimum inhibitory concentration and minimum bactericidal concentration is very large, then we will say that it is a bacteriostatic agent. Now, in this diagram, I want to show that the drug, if maintained above the minimum inhibitory concentration, that will prevent the growth of microorganisms. Here what we can see that once the drug has fallen below the minimum inhibitory concentration, still there is certain effect. There is certain effect of the antimicrobial agent for some time, even after the concentration drops below the minimum inhibitory concentration. This is called post-antibiotic effect. We will see this later on. Okay, post-antibiotic effect. That is persistent suppression of bacterial growth after a brief exposure of the antimicrobial agent. Certain time is required by the bacteria to return back to their normal replicating cycle, even in the absence of antimicrobial agent. Okay. Till now we have covered two factors: host factors and the organism related factors. The third factor is the drug related factor. Spectrum. We have seen narrow spectrum antimicrobial agents. They are used for definitive therapy. When we know that this is the microorganism causing this infection, then definitely we will go for a narrow spectrum. For empirical therapy, we use a broad spectrum antimicrobial agent. Again, type of activity: bactericidal and bacteriostatic. We have seen that bactericidal drugs give faster reduction in the bacterial load, bacterial number, plus they have got a longer post-antibiotic effect. So they are better, they are used for the agents, they are used for those persons who have certain immunodeficiency, or if the host defense is impaired, then we go for intensive therapy, and that too with the cidal drugs. We have covered this. Bacteriostatic drugs, they are not that much useful in immunocompromised patients or patients with other impaired host defense. Sensitivity and relative toxicity, yes. Definitely a sensitive drug with a longer post-antibiotic effect will be preferred. Definitely, once again, a drug with lower side effects, lower incidence of side effects or less severe side effects will be preferred over a drug which causes more frequent or more severe side effects. Okay. Now, we know that to cure an infection, the drug has to be present in the site where organisms are there at certain concentration for certain time. Here there are two types of activity which we can see. One is time dependent killing or time dependent activity, and another is concentration dependent activity. So concentration dependent killing. Here we can see that what matters is the Cmax. How much times the maximum concentration attained is above the minimum inhibitory concentration. That ratio of maximum concentration to MIC matters. So Cmax is the parameter of interest. So definitely we will keep the concentration of the antimicrobial agent as maximum as possible. Usually these sort of antimicrobial agents show a long post-antibiotic effect. So in these drugs, the dosage interval can be widened. We will see. Examples are aminoglycosides and fluoroquinolones. In this diagram, we can see that, okay, as we increase the concentration, like this one, black dots, they are having the 64 times concentration of MIC, minimum inhibitory concentration. There is the least bacterial count. So in short, as the concentration keeps on increasing, the bacterial count keeps on decreasing. Now next is the time dependent killing. In time dependent killing, parameter of interest is time above minimum inhibitory concentration. This much duration for which the drug concentration is maintained above this minimum inhibitory concentration, that matters. So we have to give frequent dosing. Like if you have to give one drug, if it is concentration dependent killing, we will give that whole amount of drug in one shot to get a higher peak plasma concentration. Whereas in case of time dependent killing, we will divide the drug doses so that concentration above MIC is maintained for a longer period of time. So remember, time dependent killing or time dependent activity, you require to give divided doses frequently. Examples are macrolides like erythromycin. Here we can see in x-axis it is time. So as the time keeps on increasing, the bacterial count keeps on decreasing. So again, concentration dependent killing, we require maximum Cmax. So what we do is we give one good dose, one single large dose to attain a higher peak concentration in figure A. Now figure B, that is time dependent killing. Instead of one big single dose, we give frequent small doses so that the time MIC, the concentration of the drug is above MIC for a longer period of time. Okay. Drug factors like kinetics of absorption, distribution, elimination, ability of a drug to reach the site of action. Certain drugs, they have got very good penetration, like ciprofloxacin or fluoroquinolones. They go inside the cell, they go inside cartilage, tissue. They have got a wider distribution. Certain drugs penetrate certain organs better. Some drugs are not able to penetrate intracellularly, or they are not going into the CSF. So those drugs are to be used accordingly. Route of administration, that is same, like if the situation demands or we can wait, it is not an emergency, then definitely oral treatment will be preferred. If there is an emergency treatment, then we will go for intravenous route. Certain drugs like aminoglycosides, they are available in intravenous preparation only, injectable preparation only. So accordingly we will choose. Cost effectiveness, yes. In a developing country or resource poor country, the treatment which is more cheap, that will be preferred. Then we have to see for evidence of clinical efficacy. By evidence we mean that treatment with a particular agent at a particular dose is proven, that is published in a clinical trial or a meta-analysis. Then we say that it is having evidence that supports the treatment. So today, or this is era of evidence-based treatment, and if you give a treatment based on evidence, you can defend yourselves. Okay. So objective of today's class was one, to see which factors help us choose an antimicrobial agent. The second objective was to see the combined use of antimicrobials. Now this combined use of antimicrobials, again it is very similar to what we have seen in general pharmacology, that is combined use of drugs. So in this topic, combined use of antimicrobials, we will consider covering one, to achieve synergism, second, to prevent the emergence of resistance, and third, to broaden the spectrum of antimicrobial action. As always, it has some demerits or disadvantages also. Let's see them one by one. Synergism. Again, whenever we combine two drugs, even antimicrobial agents, there is a possibility that there is a synergistic effect, that is supra-additive, or there is additive effect, or there is antagonistic effects. Okay. So the decrease, if there is any decrease in the minimum inhibitory concentration of either one drug or both drugs in presence when used together, then we see that there is synergism. So decrease in MIC of either one or both of them, that is required. Now if some drugs are combined, and if the minimum inhibitory concentration falls less than 25%, we will call it synergistic combination. If the fall in MIC is between 25 to 50%, we will call it additive activity, and if the MIC does not fall more than 50%, then that is called antagonism. Let's see synergism. Two bacteriostatic drugs, if combined, mostly they are additive and rarely they are synergistic. So one good example of two bacteriostatic drugs, like trimethoprim and sulfamethoxazole. But when these two drugs are combined, that preparation is called cotrimoxazole, and that is bactericidal. If two bactericidal drugs are given, they are either additive or sometimes synergistic. Example, vancomycin plus gentamicin, they are having synergistic cidal effect on enterococcal subacute bacterial endocarditis. Ticarcillin and gentamicin for Pseudomonas. Rifampicin and isoniazid in case of tuberculosis. Okay. Combination of a bactericidal and a bacteriostatic drug may be synergistic or may be antagonistic. Now this depends on the sensitivity to the bactericidal drug. Let's see. If the organism is highly sensitive to the cidal drug, then that combination will be antagonistic combination. Why? Because bactericidal drugs, they are having more activity in a rapidly dividing microorganism. If a bacteriostatic drug is given, that decreases the division or replication of microorganism, and the cidal drug is not having good activity. So it becomes a antagonistic combination. Like penicillin plus tetracycline in case of pneumococcal meningitis. In case of pneumococcal meningitis, those patients treated with penicillin alone were cured faster compared to those who were treated with penicillin along with tetracycline. So this shows that combination of penicillin and tetracycline is antagonist in case of pneumococcal meningitis. Now, if the organism has low sensitivity to the seedal drug, then there occurs synergism. Okay. If the drug organism is less sensitive to the seedal drug, then its combination with the static drug can become additive, synergistic, can show synergistic effects. Example, rifampicin plus dapsone in case of leprosy, and penicillin in combination with sulfonamides in case of actinomycosis. Antimicrobial agents are combined also to reduce the adverse drug reactions. We have seen that if you give one drug in high dose, it will produce full side effects. Instead, if we give two drugs in reduced doses, then their additive or desired action will be added and their side effects will be less. Same thing we have covered in general principles or general pharmacology as well. Synergistic combinations we have seen. Streptomycin and penicillin similarly is given for treatment of subacute bacterial endocarditis. Their individual toxicity is reduced, whereas their efficacies add up. Most important, antimicrobial agents are given in combination for the prevention of emergence of resistance. In a given group of organisms, suppose drug A is given and the probability that a microorganism is resistant to that is 1 in 10 to the power 5, or for example 1 in 100. Same population, one microorganism will be such that it is resistant to drug B. Again the probability let be 1 in 100. So as per probability theory, one bacteria which will be resistant to both drugs A and drug B, their probabilities multiply. So 1 in 10,000, the probability of finding a bacteria resistant to both drugs, drug A and drug B, will be 1 in 10,000. So similarly, if we add 3 drugs, the probability of one microorganism resistant to all the 3 drugs will be much less. The probability of getting such a microorganism is much less compared to either single drug or 2 drugs. So as we keep on increasing the number of drugs, the probability of a resistant bacteria to all of them decreases. Again, it is useful, the combination therapy is useful in case of chronic infections which require long-term treatment, because we have seen that for development of resistance, time is a factor. Acute infections or treatment for acute infections generally does not cause appearance of resistance, whereas in chronic diseases the drug is given for a prolonged period of time, and in those cases development of resistance is higher. The example is HIV, tuberculosis, leprosy, malaria, even treatment of H. pylori infection. Okay. We have seen that combination therapy or prevention of development of resistance is of less concern in acute infections. Now, one reason why we give combination of treatments, combination of antimicrobial agents, is to increase the spectrum of activity. We have seen, like in case of mixed infection, where 2 or more microorganisms may be causing, then to cure them or treat them, we will be giving combination of 2 or more drugs. Or in case of initiation of a treatment for severe condition like septicemia or meningitis, we start with the combination of drugs. One example I have given, like beta-lactam penicillin for gram-positives, aminoglycosides for gram-negative, and metronidazole or clindamycin for anaerobes. So these are combined to cover most of the microorganisms. Again, some drugs which are toxic, they are not given systemically, but their combination can be given for oral application or as in oral preparations. In general pharmacology, we had seen certain disadvantages of combination therapy. Same we can see here also. Casual approach. We should not blindly give a combination of two or more drugs, but we should make an accurate diagnosis, culture and sensitivity, then we will give the proper treatment. So combination therapy should not be a substitute for accurate diagnosis. Second, as usual, combinations, it can produce sometimes a higher incidence of side effects. Like if we give two ototoxic drugs, then the resultant ototoxicity will be much more. If one renal nephrotoxic drug is combined with another nephrotoxic drug, then together they will cause a higher grade of nephrotoxicity, and that is to be avoided. Definitely adding two or more drugs, that increases to the cost of therapy also. Emergence of resistance. Actually, we combined those, we give combination therapy to prevent the emergence of resistance. But if because of any reason there is subtherapeutic level of drugs, then there is also a risk of development of resistance, emergence of resistance. Superinfection, we have seen broader spectrum antimicrobials, they were producing superinfection. That is emergence of a new infection while treating an older infection. So combination therapy also does the same thing. It increases the development of superinfection, like by Candida or some other microorganisms. Okay, just one glimpse. What is prophylaxis, preemptive, empiric, definitive and suppressive? So we will cover this later on. So when there is no infection, still we are giving drug, either to prevent it or decrease its severity. So that is called prophylaxis of the prophylactic treatment. Okay. So one of today's objectives has been covered. We have covered how to choose antimicrobial agents. Second, combined use of antimicrobial agents. Now this is third, prophylactic use of antimicrobial agents. So we are in the third part of today's class. Sometimes specific, if we know that particular infection can occur, then we will go for specific treatment against that option. Like in case of rheumatic fever. You know that group A beta hemolytic streptococci that will lead to rheumatic heart disease later on. So prevent rheumatic fever. Give treatment against that. If a child is coming in contact with a tuberculosis patient, then we can give isoniazid prophylaxis to the child so that child does not develop tuberculosis. Again, prophylactic therapy is important in case of immunocompromised patients. We have seen this under the heading impaired host defenses. Like either patient is of HIV, diabetes, or patient is on some chemotherapeutic agents or radiotherapy and so on. Also, there are certain high-risk situations. Person is normal but the situation is risky. One good example is there is no risk of subacute bacterial endocarditis in case of tooth extraction. But if the patient is having some valvular disease, then the same tooth extraction can lead to development of subacute bacterial endocarditis. Catheterization is an example. Chemoprophylaxis for surgical procedures. Whenever we do surgery, there is some sort of wound formation and it can lead to infections. So we give surgical prophylaxis or chemoprophylaxis for the surgical procedures. Post-exposure prophylaxis. Here, the person is exposed to the infection or infecting organism, but even after that, if we give drug treatment, either the disease may not develop or the disease which develops will be milder and of less severity. But sometimes it is not useful because in treatment we know what we are treating, what we know. Whereas in prevention, we are preventing against many of the organisms. Exactly which one will infect, we do not know. Sometimes it is useless, like to give a drug, antimicrobial agent to a mother after labor. Also, it's not always necessary that we should give antimicrobials to a patient who is on respirator. Many times in viral infections, we expect that it can lead to or it can progress to having secondary bacterial infection. So in those cases, sometimes antimicrobial agent is given to prevent the secondary bacterial infections in case of viral infections. So it is not always necessary. So let's see prophylaxis for surgical site infection. So surgical site infection can be either superficial, like in case of stitches or superficial wound, or it can be deep inside the organs or body cavities. So for that, the wound is classified according to the National Research Council NRC criteria as clean wound, where the planned surgery is done and there is no bacteria or microorganism contamination or minimum contamination. It can be either clean contaminated, like in this previous example, but where the surgery is being carried out on emergency basis. It can be contaminated if there is some opening of viscera or there is penetration injury of more than 4 hours duration. And the wound is dirty if there is already good amount of pus present or there is some penetrating wound of more than 4 hours duration. Let's see. The risk for infection increases if the surgery is lasting for more than 2 hours. If there is insertion of any prosthesis in bone or any other soft tissue. And as we have already discussed, in certain population in which the host defense is already impaired. So what matters is the peak blood duration, peak concentration of the antimicrobial when clot is forming. Earlier I had discussed about the presence of hematoma. In surgery, when hematomas are formed, there are chances that the microorganisms, they are trapped inside the hematomas. They divide and multiply in the hematomas and they are spread from that place. Whereas in a hematoma, it becomes difficult for the drug to penetrate within the hematoma, and especially if the hematoma is 3 or 4 hours old. So we will make sure that the drug is present in the blood before it clots, so that if a hematoma is formed, already the drug is present in the hematoma as well. So for this, to fulfill this criteria, oral drugs are given 1 hour before incision and intravenous administration of drugs or parenteral drugs are given either before or after administration of anesthesia. Some example, in case of a clean contaminated wound is amoxicillin 2 gram 50 mg per kg, cephalexin 2 gram 50 mg per kg, cefadroxil 2 gram 50 mg per kg, clindamycin, azithromycin or clarithromycin. So these are certain drugs which are given 1, 2, 3 and those 4, 5, 6 in case of allergy to beta-lactam drugs. Again, coming to the clean contaminated wound, intravenous single dose is given 1 hour before the procedure. It can be either amoxicillin, cefazolin, or a combination of vancomycin or clindamycin, and for penicillin allergic patients, cefuroxime or metronidazole, and so on. In case of dirty contaminated wounds which are having high bacterial or microbiological load, the options which we have is cefalzolin 1 gram 8 hourly plus vancomycin 1 gram 12 hourly. It is cefoxitin 1 gram 6 hourly or cefotaxime 1 gram intravenous every 12 hourly, or we can give a combination of clindamycin and gentamicin along with either gentamicin or metronidazole, or amoxicillin can be given along with clavulinate. So in case of dirty wounds, all this treatment is given for a minimum period of 5 days, and it can be extended also. Coming back to this diagram, if there is no infection and we are giving a drug, antimicrobial agent, that is prophylactic therapy. If the infection is there, but we give the drug before onset of symptoms, that is called preemptive treatment. If the symptom is present, but bacterial diagnosis is not yet made, then the antimicrobial treatment which we give is called empiric treatment. If the pathogen has been identified and we give a particular drug, specific drug to treat it, that is called definitive treatment. And if we give it just for speeding up of the resolution, then we call it suppressive treatment. So preemptive therapy, that is early targeted therapy, and the infection is confirmed by investigation. Patient is asymptomatic, that time he has not developed the full symptoms. Empirical therapy, that is given to symptomatic patients. Good guesses made based on the clinical features and experience of the treating person according to the local prevalence. Definitive therapy, when the pathogen is known, proper dose and dosing schedule is given for appropriate duration. So in this we have covered the third portion. Now coming to the last portion of today's class, that is failure of chemotherapy. So like any other treatment failure, same factors are responsible here also for the failure of treatment. One is false diagnosis, wrong diagnosis, or if the drug, inappropriate selection of the drug, its dose, its route, its duration. Therapy is also can fail if the treatment is not initiated timely because of late onset of the treatment. Third is absence of adequate measures or adjuvant measures. And as I had told that in case of infection with pus, the pus should be drained first. That decreases the load. If there is any foreign particle, foreign object, that should be removed because that produces biofilm. So there are certain adjuvant measures which have to be taken, and they will help for a speedy recovery or quick cure. Again, failure of chemotherapy or antimicrobial agents is more common in case of patients with impaired immunity or impaired host defenses. As I had told that the drugs and immunity, they are both fighting together hand in hand. Untreatable infections, like there are certain conditions or viral infections which resolve on their own. There are no drugs available, and we should not try to cure them by some other drug or trying to reduce the expecting secondary bacterial infection, all those things. Presence of barrier also impairs the cure. Dormant or altered organism, as in case of leprosy or tuberculosis, certain bacteria, they are in the dormant form. Mycobacteria, they are in the very dormant form. In case of malaria, we give treatment for Vivax, but after some years or some time, long duration, again some hypnozoites may come out. So in this lecture, apart from all those things, of learning objectives we have seen, I would like you to remember about minimum inhibitory concentration, minimum bactericidal concentration, then post-antibiotic effect, difference and example between concentration dependent killing and time dependent killing, combinations, their advantages and disadvantages, and prophylaxis. So here I will conclude my class. We have covered today's topic of how to select the antibiotic, which are the agent factor, host factor, and drug factor. Then we have seen what are the combinations, how drugs are combined use of antimicrobials. Then we have seen prophylactic use of antimicrobial agents, and finally we have seen what factors can lead to failure of the antimicrobial treatment. And thanks for your kind and patient listening. Okay, thanks.